Glenn Jacobs, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So before we got started, I was telling you a little bit. I've been adjacent to your former life as a wrestler, but that is not what I'm excited to talk to you about today. I'm excited to talk to you about being a philosophically rigorous mayor, because that and a liberty-minded one at that. So your alter ego is Kane. How much of Kane has come into being a mayor?
Not much, actually. People will ask me, what did I learn in WWE that could apply to politics? And I always say, obviously, the woman to body slam someone. And I was like, no, it's not the in-ring stuff, but it is interpersonal relationship skills and being part of a team and understanding leadership and all those sort of things. And their politics are just part of society. I mean, we think of politics and governmental politics, but I mean, it is everywhere. And ultimately, your ability to succeed and in politics, something it gets a bad rap. The term does. But, ultimately all it means is just your ability to convince other people, persuade them that your viewpoint is correct and move forward. I did learn that in WWE because WWE is actually pretty political backstage.
One of the things that's been interesting is that there is a couple intersections. Donald Trump is one of them, right?
Yep.
Because he played a role from time to time on the screen in wrestling, and there's this other sort of public intellectual, Eric Weinstein, who years ago wrote this piece about American politics and basically calling everything that's happening kayfabe. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, yeah.
So what was he getting at? How do you see the role of kayfabe in American politics?
Oh, yeah. So,
what is kayfabe?
In wrestling, it just means that's part of the show. Okay, you say the kayfabe something. It means that the public or outsiders, this is part of the show. So be careful what you say. It's kind of code for classified information, as the federal government would say. All right. But it is a lot of what, and a lot of what I see, always talk about wrestling and how it's just like politics, and you have, opposing figures who are often actually they're okay behind the scenes, but they put on a heck of a fight for the public.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other things that go into that as well. And we're seeing it right now with Trump's second term and how the Democrats, literally, they're freaking out over things. Why are they freaking out? Well, because it's Trump doing it or it's Elon Musk doing it. And it's all about power and being afraid of losing that power and really standing in the way of someone succeeding. And that's something I can't understand. What I'd like to do over the next period of time is ensure that the next person has the ability to succeed, right? I can't understand this idea of you're on the other team, so I don't want you to succeed. I'm going to throw as many roadblocks in your way as possible. But, it's things like that are actually bigger. And in many ways, professional wrestling is a lot more real than politics is.
What do you mean by that? Dig into that a little deeper.
Because people, when they watch all this stuff on TV and they think, oh my gosh, this person, they're for me. They're not for you. They're for themselves, and they're using you basically as a pawn to put themselves in a position to gain more power, to not lose the power that they already have. They're not working for the best interests of their constituents. They're working for themselves. Okay. But because they're respected figures, elected officials, we tend to think that, they're a wonderful person, maybe, but what they're doing is not serving you or the public.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you won't miss more Dad Saves America as our videos come out each week. And it also really helps us because when we reach out to guests, they look at how many subscribers there are to decide if they want to come on and share their ideas. So please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thanks for watching. Now, back to the show. There's always been this dichotomy of, well, I hate Congress, but I like my congressman.
Right.
I think that might still be true, but why do you think that is? Why do you think people can hold like a contempt for like politics as a whole, but then they like the guy that represents them.
In many cases, it's because he's the person that brings the bacon back to the district, he or she. In other cases, it's just because, they're good politician, they're a good campaigner, and they get out and they have a connection with the people that they serve. And also, obviously, what they do is they're up there fighting for you against all these other people that you hate. I think there are a number of factors there, and you're exactly right. It's baffling to think that Congress has an approval rating in the single digits, but when it comes re-election season, over 90% of House members go back every cycle. So there's definitely something strange going on there.
That's always been such an interesting thing. You hear these, it's a wave, it's a change election, but the incumbency rate is like always over 90. Even the wave, it's like, it almost got below 90% incumbents reelected.
Right. And a lot of those things just basically the way that elections are run nowadays, and the fact that the incumbents just have huge advantage because they're on TV all the time. They can raise more money because they have the connections to do that. In Tennessee, last session, our House just passed a resolution joining the other states calling for Congress to impose term limits. I was the head of the U.S. term limits, the chairperson of the U.S. term limits in Tennessee, which led that effort. And really, it's, you'll hear some people say, well, the term limits are elections in Congress. Well, the problem is when the founders were putting the Constitution together, election campaign wasn't like it is now, and now the incumbents have so many advantages. It's very difficult for a newcomer to overcome those.
So one of the arguments I've heard about term limits in opposition is that you want, in theory, politicians to be there long enough to have skin in the game of the outcome of what they're doing, and to actually develop knowledge. If you like your senator and he's doing right by you, let him get to be McConnell age, because he's there and he understands the way things work, and you can, in theory, hold him accountable for that law he passed 10 years ago where he said, I'm going to make magical things happen. And when magic doesn't happen, you can theoretically hold him accountable. What's your response to that?
Theoretically, sure. The problem is we have moved in a world which is so far away from that. There is something to be said for institutional knowledge, obviously. And I think specifically for term limits, obviously I'm not the person that would contemplate or talk about proposing the exact measure, but for me, it's like 6 years or 6 terms in the House, which is 12 years, and you can still go to the Senate 2 terms, which is 12 years. If you don't have your act together after a couple terms anyway, and something else that, I don't know how you address this, but the fact that House members only serve for 2 years, so they're just always campaigning and always out there, and I think that puts them at a deficit. And I think if the founders were to do it all over again, they'd probably extend those to 4-year terms. Just the 2 year seems to, you do end up losing things, or could possibly lose a lot of institutional knowledge, and that is a valid argument, because you do have to kind of navigate this matrix of Washington, D.C. At the same time, I would argue, though, really the underlying issue of all this is the government's just way too big. And these people have way too much power, and they're into way too many things. And ultimately, it should be simplified for everybody.
How did you first get into political philosophy? What was it like reading like Atlas Shrugged as a kid? Like what was your entry point that set you on a path towards eventually like running for office and becoming mayor of a city or a county with over half a million people, I think, right?
Yeah. My first memory as a child was riding in the back of my family's Volkswagen Dasher station wagon, passing under some of the high voltage power lines, and hearing my parents talk about how bad eminent domain was and the fact that the government could just take people's property from them. So that probably colored a lot of my political philosophy. My mom and dad were what I would call Goldwater Republicans, but it wasn't like we talked about politics at the kitchen table or anything. But I just had kind of a natural curiosity when I was in school, history and politics, were always my favorite subjects. Then went through college and kind of heard the left side of things, not nearly as much as kids do today.
No,
The professors were, they had their philosophy, but they weren't aggressive in promoting that, and they certainly didn't punish you if you wanted to ask questions or had different ideas, which is frankly is fine. It's how things should be, right? Then when I got out and into WWE, well, we're independent contractors, so we're responsible for paying our own taxes, for doing a lot of things that employees don't have to do.
So you were running Kane Inc.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And I'm gonna tell you something. If we want to see this country change, instead of people getting a refund on April 15th, make them write a check to the IRS once a quarter, and then watch how that money is spent, and it just becomes enraging. So for me, it was just, you had those personal issues at the same time. A friend of mine, when I was kind of a political nomad. I didn't have a home, and because there was stuff that I agreed with the right on, stuff I agreed with the left on. Yeah, and this is before the left completely went off the rails, by the way. But issues like free expression and free speech, on the left. There was a time when they were the strong ones on that.
It's increasingly vanishing memory.
Unfortunately, they weren't the authoritarians that they are today. But I wasn't in the middle either. And a lot of times you hear people describe themselves as a centrist, which is actually kind of the worst, because what often happens is you pull the worst of both sides in. So I was like an anti-centrist, in that I agreed here, but not all of it. And a friend of mine just said, you should check these things out. And I did, and then I went down the rabbit hole, and eventually I was like, my gosh, this idea that there's only two sides of the political spectrum is nonsense. It's much more of the Nolan chart, right? Where the important thing is not if you're on the left or right, is if you agree with freedom or authoritarianism. Right. And once I discovered that, I was like, well, my problem is I believe in freedom and liberty. And unfortunately, both sides, especially back then, it's changed a lot. But, both sides had some failings in that regard.
So do you call yourself a libertarian?
I would. I would describe myself as, I'm a conservative, and I believe in the ideas this country is founded on. And those ideas are libertarian. I consider myself a conservative because I believe in the ideas that this country is founded on. We should be conserving those, but those ideas are mostly libertarian ideas. So a term that's probably better for me is conservatarian.
It's one of the things that's, we're here at a conference that's a liberty-oriented conference. And I think one of the things I found myself, as I get older, it's like, freedom is essential, but it is essential for a purpose. I had a conversation yesterday that irked the person I was talking to, because they're like, no, freedom is good in and of itself. It's like, well, yeah, but isn't it good because humans flourish in freedom, and flourish has a particular character, and it's different for every person. Like, how do you think about why freedom works?
So Ludwig von Mises would talk about how certain ideologies just can't make it in the real world, because eventually when the rubber meets the road, the results they produce are unacceptable. Freedom produces the best results. Prosperity, peace. The American dream is about freedom. It's about people being able to take advantage of their gifts and skills and talents that benefit other folks and thereby benefit themselves. So ultimately, not only is it, in my opinion, the most moral social arrangement, it is also the most effective one for producing prosperity and peace, which is something that we all want, obviously.
Was there thinkers or books that really were like the key to unlock the door to the way you think or organize your thinking?
Sure. I mean, there's actually too many to mention. No, I was a big fan of former Congressman Ron Paul.
Me too.
Kind of the 2006, his campaign made me realize I wasn't the only person. Wasn't the only person in America that thought like that.
We have that in common.
Yeah, him, Judge Napolitano, when it comes to legal issues, Mises and Rothbard when it comes to economics. Rothbard also, just on the basically, again, when we talk about libertarianism, what we're talking about is more of a legal system than anything else, right? When is it, and politics in general, but when is it okay to use force
Yeah.
against people? So I mean, Hayek, just everybody, and it's kind of interesting with those thinkers of how they thread all these things together, whereas on or with a lot of authors and pundits, they treat individual liberty, what you do with your body and your relationships with people, that's different from economic freedom.
Yeah.
They can't be. They're the same thing. They're part of our lives. They're part of this overall liberty as a philosophy that people should have as much freedom as possible within society, which means they have to respect other people's freedom as well. So I think one of the major differences is you can see kind of a comprehensive philosophy as opposed to that we agree with this over here and we agree with this over here, and not seeing the relationship and how they're really the same thing.
Where have you been most challenged on your philosophy? Has there been, especially as you've, gotten into practical politics, have there been things that have been like, wow, that challenges the way I've thought about this in theory, or it rounds it out and adds more
Sure.
nuance? Like, give me, like,
Sure. There's where our country is right now, with the cultural Marxism is a real thing. Okay. And I mean, you can point back to historical beginnings and you can see how it's evolved now. And, some of the things that would be normally be like, oh, people should have choice to do that. It's like, well, they're actually using that in a way to really destroy society. So how do you deal with things you would normally be like, or even some things that Trump's doing right now. I'm not a big fan of executive orders, but he's literally fighting fire with fire. Obviously you don't want that to keep on going because at some point Congress has to legislate. But it almost feels like our country's in this somewhat of a crisis. So things that I'd normally be like, I don't think this is such a great idea. You're almost forced into it at the same time, realizing that you don't want to open the door. What always happens then is the other side will use whatever you've done against you. So how do you make sure that the door closes, hopefully, after you kind of address some of these issues?
is there like a specific, you said cultural Marxism. What does that mean to you?
I mean, just like, the DEI stuff, the LGBT stuff, all of that. Okay. I'm a big believer in live your own life, do what you want, but don't push it on other people, and certainly don't mandate other people, to do these things. But all that stuff just went so haywire, and you could literally see it was being used. As I said, I'm a conservative. It was being used to destroy the foundations of our country. And that's something that I have to really push back against.
Where have you seen that? You're in Tennessee.
Yeah, not so much for us,
sure, but
because we're watching it on the outside, but it's just those thoughts of, your initial reaction is, no one, they shouldn't be getting involved in this. But then you realize, oh my gosh, if no one does anything, this is going to be very bad in the end.
This has been one thing that's been really interesting in the changing shape of, like, I guess you could say like the right, maybe, but so Christopher Rufo, who I've known for a while, a lot of people who call themselves libertarians don't like Chris Rufo because he's come out hard against DEI and in schools, and he's also been very critical of libertarians, but he's saying the schools are run by the government.
Yeah.
So government is involved, pretending you can't only be for dismantling government involvement. You have to, that's great,
right?
But you also have to not let the pro-government people just run the whole thing, because that's when you get
exactly
drag queen story hour in kindergarten and all this crazy stuff. So is that kind of how you understand it?
Yes. I was reading something by Jeffrey Tucker the other day, and he was talking about this as well. All this talk about the food chain, and, oh my gosh, we don't want government to mandate these, you can't put this in it. You have to put this in it, and a lot of those things, which I still agree with. At the same time, a lot of that stuff happened because of government involvement to begin with. You think about the nutrition pyramid, right?
Yeah.
That was all the result of dairy lobbyists pushing milk or whatever, or the various special interest groups. So when you start peeling back the layers, it becomes very difficult because you realize, oh my gosh, so many of these things had government involvement to begin with, and now it's flipped and being used against us.
When was the very first time you engaged in politics? Did you start off like volunteering in a committee or something like that? How did you get your feet wet?
It was the Ron Paul campaign, and I was just involved, not, volunteering, doing some things in that.
Was this in 2008?
2008, I'm sorry. Yeah, yes. That would have been
Me too.
really my first foray into it, yeah. And I had I never wanted to get involved, even before that, and then kind of after that as well. But, for me, I have 2 daughters and I have 2 grandkids, and I was like, gosh, man, this whole thing has been great to me. I mean, I've lived the American dream. It's been awesome. And it's almost like I get sucked into it because I'm like, what happens to them? I'm a good person. I think I have the right ideas. And if people like me just sit on the sidelines, what kind of world are they going to inherit? And I just I literally couldn't live with myself thinking that I might have the opportunity to at least in some small way impact things. And I just wasn't going to do that because I didn't want to get my hands dirty in politics.
What came next? So what did it mean to volunteer for Ron Paul? Let's start there.
In that case, it was just going to rallies, talking with folks, that sort of thing.
I mean, you're a celebrity. Did you like get on stage with Ron?
Yeah.
And in character?
Yeah.
Or no, not allowed. Not allowed.
Didn't do that. But from there is just educating myself more and more and more. And I would help out candidates here and there. Just as far as whether it was money or help or sometimes endorsing people and that sort of thing. And then I guess it was just a steady progression of getting a little more deeply involved. In Tennessee, we're as we were talking about before, I think it's the best place to live in the entire world. And we're much more, people think, oh, socially conservative Bible Belt. Well, yeah, to some extent, but also we're pretty much live and let live there, so it's the perfect place for someone like me. Especially, my interest is really economics. The personal liberty side's important, but to me, it all stems from the economic side of things. And we're all fiscal conservative. Well, not all of us, but the vast majority of us are fiscal conservatives in East Tennessee. So I fit in really well, even before I became mayor, just helping other people out and so forth.
When did you decide I'm going to run for mayor, and how did your family take it?
About a year and a half before the election, I thought to this is one of those things where probably the idea of running for office had been floating around in my brain, but I'd never really seriously considered it. Our mayor, who is now Congressman Tim Burchett, who's great, he's wonderful, but he was term limited. So literally one day I woke up and I thought, wow, he's out of office that has an open seat. As mayor, especially of a larger place like Knox County, you can have a pretty big impact and have a pretty big voice. That might be cool. And talked to a couple people that were supporters and thought that I would do well at it. My wife never wanted to be involved in politics at all.
She's like, well, no,
so,
what are you roping me into?
Yeah, but she's awesome. And she said, she always says, I'll support you no matter what you do. Now, sometimes, sometimes it's like, okay. But my family was overall supportive. I think that I had an advantage in that I was already in the public eye. That's difficult for someone maybe who's never been there before, and then they run for office, and all of a sudden the media's talking about them and all these sort of things. For me, it was already happening, so it didn't really matter. Different though, and when you receive criticism, And unfortunately now with social media, so many times
Yeah.
it's just people that don't even know what they're talking about. It's actually harder on your family. Because for me, I realized that, these people don't know me. They want to yell about something. They will yell at someone. My family doesn't, they don't, they don't think like that. They think he's attacking my husband or he's attacking my dad.
Yeah.
So it becomes harder on them. So when elected officials do talk about how important their spouses and their families are, that's true. I think that they actually bear the brunt more than we do because for us it's part of the job, but they didn't sign up for that.
How did you think about your own identity before going into this? Because one of the things that I think is so hard, there's that famous saying that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And the more, power, fame, these are all forces that can twist our ego and our identities. How have you protected yourself against that? And how do you know when you're going off the rails?
Yeah, I'm probably wired a little maybe differently in that respect. Again, I already had fame from WWE.
Well,
Um,
start there. Like, how did
yeah,
that? How did it screw with you?
what's that? The fame?
Yeah.
No, man. I've always been the same person. And that's just how I am. And I realized that Kane is a persona, and don't get me wrong, it was wonderful. My family benefited tremendously. At the same time, that's not who I am. And I could see other of my colleagues and sometimes very dear friends, and they would kind of get pulled into the hype, and then ultimately that's self-destructive. Uh, I always had a goal in mind. The goal in mind is I was trying to take care of my family, and then when I retired, hopefully we're in a position where we wouldn't have to stress about missing a paycheck, right?
Yeah.
But my goal was never, hey, I want to be. Now my goal, I am very success driven, okay, and I'm very competitive. I'm a pretty laid back guy. So people may not think that, but I am. If I do something
Yeah.
and I want to be good at it, I generally want to be the best at it. So that did propel me, obviously, but the end was not, oh, I want to be famous or I want to be super wealthy or anything like that. The end was I want to be able to take care of my family. Um, and all this other stuff was basically just a fringe benefit, if you will. So this is the same way. I don't, man. I could leave tomorrow and I'd be fine. I'm not one of those that's like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. I think what I do is important, and again, I think you need good people in it. But for me personally, I'm like a hardcore introvert, which is really strange because I keep on picking these occupations, yeah, where I'm right in the public eye. I've gotten used to that. But ultimately, at my core, I'd be fine just, at home reading a book or watching TV or playing video games. Um, and I just don't need that, the stuff that comes along with this. Uh, so it also, I am in a position that it's not like I need to do this job, and that helps me because I can do the right thing because like at the end of the day, man, if I can't get voted out now because I'm term limited. But, still at the end of the day, it's like I'm going to do the right thing. And that's what matters because I have to live with myself and I have to live with that. And if I don't have this job anymore, that's okay. And
The
I wish more elected officials thought like that as opposed to, I have to keep this job no matter what I have to do.
One of the things, and we'll come back to the political life, but one of the things this just makes me think about is, this show is called Dad Saves America because I just think that is a central role we play that's
Right.
heroic. And so many young men are lost, and they're looking out into a culture that on one hand has been bashing them, and you have daughters, so girls are facing all kinds of trouble of different kinds and similar kinds, social media and all this stuff. um how do you think about you know the boy crisis? Especially like WWE, like a lot of those, the young guys that are showing up, the kids, they're in the thick of that. They're in the thick of
Hmm.
like, what am I going to do with my life? Am I just part of the patriarchy? There's all these messages that have like
Yeah.
landed on our boys. And I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of boys that have like looked up to you. How do you think about like what does it mean to be a man?
One of the reasons that the left despises Donald Trump is he is an alpha man. I mean, that's just it. They don't like that. He is the ultimate in toxic masculinity, right? But that's not a bad thing. And for the young men out there, our jobs is to be the strong one. The in ancient times, the women were the nurturers, but the men were the warriors, and we have lost that, I think, to a large degree. We're not the same. Men and women are not the same. We are different. Sorry, folks, but there's just biological differences between us, which translate into social roles. That's just how it is. But those roles, throughout history have been, the men are, and when I say strong, I just mean physically strong and willing to defend their families. They're the protectors.
Yeah.
Women are the nurturers. They're much better at that. My wife can read my mind half the time, I swear.
Probably better than you know it.
Better than I know, exactly. She knows when something's wrong before I know something's wrong. But at the same time, my job is to protect my family. And men's job is to protect society, to defend, in our country, to defend the ideals that we believe in. There's honor in that, and there's nobility in that. And I think that, again, going back to kind of this cultural Marxist revolution we're seeing, which is counter-revolution to the ideals of 1776, frankly.
Yeah.
That's part of it, is to literally neuter men so that they will no longer take on the role of standing up and pushing back. So you look at a guy like Donald Trump, you look at a guy like Elon Musk, and the fact that they're pushing back, and that is everything that the far left, everything that culture Marxists hate. Because imagine all of a sudden if you had a nation of those guys saying, we're not going to do this anymore and we're going to push back, this whole thing changes. So again, when you hear the term toxic masculinity, you don't need to be a jerk, obviously. We can all, I believe that kindness is not a sign of weakness. I believe that actually being kind is a sign of strength. At the same time, in your core, it's all right to be strong, and it's all right to do the right thing, no matter what folks might say about you.
One of the things that was funny about like that masculine projection, it was probably most visceral at the RNC, where you had Dana White and your fellow former colleague Hulk Hogan on stage. Did you feel like that was a good thing, that these were images being put forward to the whole country, or was there? Okay,
I do, because just politically, you compare then leadership on the Democrat side, and there's a distinct difference between strong men and guys that are just frankly playing a role. So I think that's a very good thing. I think it, not to get partisan here, but I think it's good for the Democrat Party. I think it's good for folks on the right, because people see that and they go, that's what I want to be affiliated with, as opposed to the guys that were here to just cry and whine about everything.
You said 2 daughters?
Yes, sir.
How has that changed your conception of masculinity? What have you learned from being a dad to 2 daughters?
My daughters are awesome. They're both nurses with advanced degrees. One is a nurse practitioner. The other one has an MBA in healthcare administration, and they do great. So when I say that men are the protectors and the defenders, that doesn't mean that women can't be very strong. 'Cause my daughters are really strong, and they're great people. At the same time, like when I think about my granddaughter and this stuff with boys and girls sports, it's just ludicrous, right?
Yeah.
We're different, and we're strong in our own ways. Society needs all of that, so it's funny, because if someone were to think, oh my gosh, you don't think women, whatever. No, you need to meet my daughters. They're pretty awesome. At the same time, they also take on those roles as being the nurturers, as being, my daughter that has our grandkids, she's the best mom I've ever seen. I think a lot of that's due to she's strong, she's self-confident, all of those things. So I guess what I would learn is, or what I've learned from them is, there's different kinds of strength, and maybe what we're seeing politically is not only the demasculization of men, but it's just removing strength from the individual, so that we turn to government to protect us and take care of us and do everything for us.
One of the things that's been so weird about this woke stuff, the Marxist sort of flatten everything out, is that the way it's expressed itself in popular culture is that it's a copy and paste of a woman put into a masculine role.
Yeah.
And that, that's always been weird to me, because it seems like what you're saying is, for women to be strong, they just have to be men with long hair.
Right. Right.
As
right.
opposed to actually being, celebrating the things that are uniquely feminine. It's like, no. Captain Marvel needs to be able to kick Captain America's butt in the same way as, whatever the Red Skull would.
Right.
And that's that. And that's what it means to be like a strong female lead. Like, how do you think about the culture? You've spent so much of your life in the cultural space.
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. Going back to boys and girls sports. And that's really what it is, right? It's like, there are just physical differences between men and women. When it comes to basketball, I actually like to watch women's basketball more than I do the guys, because the women, it's all about teamwork and playing the game. A lot of times the guys is just who's the best athlete, and get them the ball and let them roll.
Right.
I watch the women. I'm like, wow, they're working together, and they're a great team. That they just don't have the physical, they don't have the size, they don't have the athleticism. Frankly, it's not to say they're not really good athletes. So yeah, you just can't mix those roles. They're different, but that doesn't diminish anything. I mean, you think of a strong woman. Think about Margaret Thatcher. I mean,
the Iron Lady.
Yeah, the Iron Lady. So it doesn't diminish anything. At the same time, we're just different. Talk about women in the military. Women are better fighter pilots than men are, because they have quicker reaction time. They're actually better marksmen than men are. They have quicker reaction time. They're not very good at hand. I don't say they're not very good, but against men, they're going to have an issue with things that take strong physical strength and stamina, just because that's not what they're built for. So we're just different, and the left is all about diversity, right? We should be celebrating the diversity between men and women, instead of literally trying to make us the same thing, because we're just not.
One of the things that the president has really gone after is this DEI structure. It is a philosophy. It's like a nicely named philosophy that each of those letters represents almost the exact opposite of what people think.
Right.
How have you, what do you think of the way the president is going about that? And, as the mayor of a city with 500,000 people, how have you confronted these impulses? Because I'm sure there's people inside of the city council and the body politic that want DEI or want DEI style stuff.
Yeah. Again, not so much in Tennessee. We really don't deal with that as much as other places do. Yeah, but you're exactly right. I mean, I when I think about people from different backgrounds and different perspectives, that's really valuable, right? And we should celebrate that. That's actual diversity. The left's idea of diversity is we look different, but we think the same. Right. Who doesn't want, equality? Well, which equality means you have equal opportunity. That's awesome. What they've done is they talk about equity, which means you have equal outcomes. There's only one way to get an equal outcome, and you can only raise these people up so far. What you have to do is you have to bring these people down. So ultimately, equity means the government mandating equal outcomes, which is not equality. Inclusion sounds great. It's wonderful. But what they're really talking about is certain people have more rights because they belong to a group than the rest of us do. So yeah, they've just flipped it all around, and really created a straw man where you hear these words and it sounds great and it sounds very fair and it's something we'd all want, but they have used those to push an agenda, which is the antithesis of everything that I think that the average person would go, oh, those are good things. We haven't seen it so much in Knox County. We have the University of Tennessee, and our the system president is awesome, but a lot of times it's the faculty that kind of run the institution. So there's been pushback on that. Our state legislature has really been pushing back on that. So
I mean, one example of that is, I think Vanderbilt's in Tennessee, isn't it?
Yeah.
Vanderbilt. I mean, I paid very close attention in last year to the, I guess 2023, and into 24, the college campus stuff in the aftermath of the Gaza, the Hamas attack, like right after, before it got into a messy war. And it was like, my God, like all the Ivy Leagues went nuts. But Vanderbilt really didn't seem to have the same kind of problems. It hasn't been in the news for becoming a fifth column of America-hating terror communism.
Right. And UT's been like that. I mean, they've had their stuff, but for the most part, it's been confined, and they've done a good job with it. So I would argue that, Tennessee, we're just in a good, we're in a better place than a lot of other places around the country are. Yes, you do still have people trying to push that, but for the most part, our folks and the majority of the population thinks these things are nuts, frankly.
When did you first become mayor?
It was September of 2018.
2018.
Yes.
So is this are you rounding out a second term?
Yes. Yes, sir.
So you got reelected. Did you gain ground between the first election and the second?
Local politics are interesting.
By touching on a soft spot?
No, just in elections are interesting. In 2006, 2018, excuse me, when I ran the first time, ballot, there were all these races. There was a governor's race, there was a Senate race, there was a congressional race. Fast forward to 2022, none of that was on the ballot. Democrats are really good organizers at the local level. So I actually, it was true for every countywide race, I actually lost ground. But I think the reason is because folks didn't see there wasn't a presidential election. You didn't have all these other things to vote for.
So you had really more of the activist types who were actually out in force, and not the general public.
Right, and that generally tends to be, in our case, the Democrats are the ones that are more well organized in that case than the Republicans are. So. Yeah, unfortunately, and again, it wasn't just me. It was every local race up and down the ballot was the same way. And I tell people, here's the thing about it is we lost a winnable school board seat in 2022, which is rather shocking to me. We're coming off of COVID and everything that happened in Loudoun County, Virginia, and everybody's focused on that.
Yeah.
And here we have a school board seat that we could have won on the Republican side, really good candidate, and he lost it to, someone who's on the very far left, actually. So my message on that would be local government matters and local elections matters, not just the president, it's not just the Senate, but it's also the local stuff.
What has it been like to be mayor? Like, what is that like?
I've had the two best jobs anyone could ever have, actually. I've been a WWE superstar and mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. There are some really great days and there are some not so great days because it is politics. But in the end, you do the position of mayor, you have an enormous amount of influence over your local community, and you can push things in certain directions. I've tried to do that without growing government. More by using the bully pulpit, more by getting the public involved, the nonprofit and the private sector. And we've had some big wins there. So even though sometimes you do have to struggle a little bit with your ideological purity, at the same time, what you really have to do is you have to figure out how to make it work in the real world and how to think. I don't even use the term outside the box because sometimes the box is fine. I use the term to think like there is no box, right? And when you do that, you're like, oh, wait, we can do this way and, not put any higher burden on the taxpayers. Really, we're handing it off to the private sector or whatever. So we've had we've had some pretty good wins in that area, and I think it's made our community a better place. I hope ultimately that's the goal.
What when you first entered at the beginning of your first term? Wait, let's start with your campaign. So, what were you running on? I mean, you had some celebrity, so
Mhm.
that had to be helpful. But what was your platform? What were you saying you were going to do for the people in Knox County?
Yeah, so, even my celebrity was kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, obviously, it would
You
get
want a wrestler to be your mayor?
that's it.
What kind of knucklehead is this
Exactly.
guy?
I'd get my foot in the door, but, I'd also have to show people that it wasn't just they weren't voting for Kane, I had some pretty good ideas, hopefully, on my own. Um, and I ran on not raising taxes. We actually haven't had a property tax increase in Knox County since 1999, which is remarkable.
Can you move to
Uh,
Austin?
uh,
Please.
what's becoming, and it's been pretty difficult over the past several years because just with inflation and some of those issues, our property tax is not indexed to inflation. So folks see our overall budget, the absolute dollars have gone up, but the real dollars have remained flat for 10 years. When you adjust our budget,
You're making me.
I'm sorry.
You're making me.
When you adjust our budget for inflation,
I'm so jealous.
Our per capita spend is literally what it was 10 years ago, as is our debt. I'd like to see that moving the other way, but obviously we do have things that we have to do.
Well, according to Congress, spending the same amount is the equivalent of murdering grandmoms.
Yes, yeah, I guess.
So, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that? It's like, no. That's
Yeah.
You've instituted radical austerity.
Can I? Let me tell you a story though. Speaking of grandmas, one day, it was about a year ago, I came into my office and there was an older lady sitting in the lobby.
Yeah.
And she was crying. My folks had already talked to her because my team is great, about doing that sort of thing. But she went and talked to the mayor. For reasons completely outside of the county's control. I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but her property, the city and the county are two separate entities in Knox County. So the city, if you live in the city, you have to pay city taxes and county property taxes.
Okay.
We can't control the city.
So Knox County that you are the mayor of is a larger area, and then there's like Knox.
I'm not,
is there a city of
There's
Knox?
a city of Knoxville, yeah, and
Okay.
I'm not the mayor of the city of Knoxville. They're their own thing.
And what's the population in Knoxville?
It's about 180,000.
Okay,
so the county's actually the unincorporated area is much larger than the city.
Gotcha.
But we don't set policy in the city. I can't do that. So anyway, her taxes. She lived in the city. Her taxes had gone way up. They'd almost doubled. And there were other factors involved here as well. She was on a fixed income and her husband had just passed away, and she had come down to the trustee's office to pay her taxes, got hit with the bill, which she was not expecting. So she showed me the envelope that had cash in it, and she had, I don't know how much it was, but it wasn't much money to get to the end of the month. That was a grandma. And, this idea that, we're going to raise taxes. We always forget about those folks, the people that can least afford it. I heard people say, I don't care if you raise my taxes. I'm like, well, take donations. Okay, so you can do that, but I'm not raising her taxes. I'm not going to do that because I have to explain to her that somehow I need her money more than she does. So that's very important to me, is keeping taxes where they're at, so we can pay the bills where they're at. So let's do that. And we don't need to, have these ideas of all these fancy new shiny objects that we need. I also, economic development, jobs, basically what that is, that was a big deal for me. Our median salary, I'd like to see that much higher than it is. And the way you do that is basically you are able to, the private sector is able to provide those great careers for people. I was also the only candidate that was talking about the drug epidemic and the opioid epidemic, which obviously is particularly hit Appalachia where we live particularly hard. So those were the things, and also just not growing government, and trying to, as much as we possibly could, stay off of people's backs. So those were the things that I really emphasized.
Tell me about your constituents. Like what? I'm sure, with 500,000 people, that's going to be a diverse group, and you've got a city in the middle of that. But is there are there distinct characteristics? You're saying like it's part of Appalachia. So help me understand kind of what Eastern Kentucky that you are governing looks like.
Yeah, so we're the capital of East Tennessee. Our population of our county is about 500,000 people. When you take in the MSA, it's about 1.2 million. So we're certainly
What's
not
an MSA?
the metropolitan statistical area. So
Gotcha.
we're not a little bitty place by any stretch of the imagination. We are the home of the University of Tennessee, which is the state's flagship university. Knox County itself, because of all that, we're actually very diverse as far as downtown. We have an area called Market Square, which was recently voted like the hippest place in America. It's just, cool restaurants and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I live out in an area town called Halls, which is still kind of country. And then we have some areas of our county which are very, very rural. So we hit everything. And because of the university, we actually do, we have probably have a very at the university anyway, you have a progressive element.
Yeah.
But for the most part, and the city
Mhm.
obviously is a lot further
Yeah.
left than the county would be. But the county overall is a very red county.
And since the city actually has its own mayor and city council, does that mean that they're kind of like a cutout in your governance, like
Yes.
a donut?
Yes,
So
that's exactly what it is.
Okay, so you really are. It really is like you're the county, but really in terms of your policy making, it's minus the city of Knoxville.
Yes, exactly.
My wife and I, for the first time, we live in Austin, but we live in a little like city within the city called Sunset Valley, which has only got like 700 residents. And so, as a fairly libertarian couple, we've actually like both volunteered on city committees and stuff. Like it's free. There's not no salary. So one of the things that is so interesting in America today, and you alluded to it, is most of this government stuff that actually touches our lives, our schools, our roads,
Yeah.
our quality of life, like, the policies that impact the jobs that are accessible to you in your area are city issues. They're not even state issues as much, it seems like to me, as city. And yet, like, participation in voting and in city government is nowhere near it is at the national level. And everybody, whenever you talk politics, you're always talking about the president and Congress. You're always talking about Washington. Is that how you see it at like in the ground, from where you're at?
100%. That's exactly right. And you can see the difference, though, even within Tennessee. You've got Knox County. We're the third largest county in the state of Tennessee. You've got Shelby County, which is where Memphis is. We're very different. Memphis and Davidson County, which is Nashville. Now they're kind of vying for the number one population in the state. But unfortunately, Shelby County's got some real issues with things like crime and mismanagement.
I mean,
and
Memphis is depressed.
People are leaving Shelby County. Meanwhile, they're coming into Davidson County, Nashville. It's the super hip place to be right now, and they're coming into Knox County as well. So you just see even locally, and even within the state of Tennessee, there's differences depending on, and as you alluded to, even within Knox County itself. If you live in the city, it's a little different than living out in the county just because of the policies that we have in place. So it makes a huge difference. And that is one of my frustrations is when people talk politics, they're talking the president, and that's important. But school board, school board, your roads, public safety, your tax rate, all these things are determined at the local level.
What do you wish more Americans understood as a matter of like civic knowledge about local politics? Like, give me a primer. It's like, for like the young adult, maybe just new dad who is like finally starting to turn your eye towards like the world beyond just my career. Help me understand where I should be spending my attention.
Sure. You do need to be paying attention to local politics because the services that we generally think of government providing, they're done at the local level, with the exception of things like national defense, but they're done at the local level. Now, obviously, we have to conform to the laws of the state of Tennessee. So there is some there is some homogeneity there, but nevertheless, all these things are local. Your quality of life, a lot of it depends on your local government and the policies that they've put in place. I think Knox County is doing great. And the reason we're doing great is because it's not because of me, but it's just because our overall attitude is let the market work, let people keep their money. We do is we fulfill the roles that we have to, that we're required to, but at the same time, I believe we don't micromanage people's lives. We don't micromanage people's businesses. So, when we think politics, it has to be more than just national or federal politics. Because so many of the things that we talk about, the president is he's not making curriculum decisions for Knox County schools. Those are made by our school board and the state school board. He's not making decisions about, this road needs to get repaved. This park needs to be mowed or needs some playground equipment or that sort of thing. Those are all local decisions. But you can see it, you compare a place like Knox County to, obviously it's a lot bigger, but Chicago.
Yeah.
Where would you rather live at this point? And again, it's not because
the population change numbers probably tell the whole story.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people too. We have a lot of issues in Tennessee and East Tennessee because we're seeing an influx of people coming in, and they're coming in from the crazy liberal areas. And not everybody, but a lot of folks are like, oh my gosh, these liberals are moving here. I'm like, they're not liberals. I talk to them, and they're tired of what's going on in other places. So I understand that it does present us some challenges, but at the same time, would you rather be the place where people want to live or the place that people are just dying to get out of? I vote for being the place where people want to live.
One of the things that I did a couple videos about the LA fires, and I had Michael Schellenberger on the show to talk about it. And you look at Los Angeles, you look at a giant city, you look at Palisades. These are, in many cases, not just Hollywood celebrities, but very successful business people. Some of whom are voting reasonably, but a lot of whom weren't.
Yeah. And
basically got the politics that they asked for. You have rural folks and urbanites. And I've thought for a while that is actually the way bigger cultural divide in this country than left versus right, Democrat, Republican, even though it somewhat maps Democrat, Republican. Mm-hmm. How do you think about that tension between people and cities? And cities offer a lot of great stuff. And they offer opportunity and density and food diversity. There's all kinds of stuff that makes city. Civilization itself is basically derived from the word for city.
Right.
How do you think about that tensions, given that it's right there, it's part of your jurisdiction, rural folks not liking the urbanites who don't know where the hell their food comes from. They think it comes from the grocery store pre-wrapped.
Right.
And urbanites thinking the rural people don't have any money and or whatever. What's your observation of those dynamics?
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up because it's absolutely true. In fact, we see that across the state. In our legislature, the rural counties are somewhat overrepresented compared to their population, just because that's the way things work out. So a lot of times things go to the legislature that have a negative impact on the larger counties. And no one's doing that on purpose. It's just we're like, hey, wait a second, before you do that, you need to think about this. So that's
can you give me an example?
Just like spending bills. We're going to spend this money out in the rural areas, and we're going to take it from Knox County. It's like, wait a second, or economic development. Economic development, the rural counties don't have the infrastructure to support a lot of the things that we do, but it spills over into the rural counties and helps them out. So when they're talking about, oh, we need to do this in this county over here, okay, the problem is they're not going to be able to support that, right? We can't. And just other things. A lot of it just has to do with funding or things like that. Which we're always vying for that, obviously. But it's interesting because then you'll kind of see us align with the other two big counties who are not where we are politically, but just, politics makes strange bedfellows, and just like that, that's bad for the big counties. Yeah, it's helpful for the smaller counties, but it's bad for us. And you just have to work those things out. And in the end, generally you do, and they realize, yeah, we need to change this or whatever. Within Knox County specifically, yeah, we do have that. And to me, it just goes back to, we're not going to push anything on anybody as much as possible. I believe that government's there, ultimately to protect people's rights. But at the same time, locally we are required to, to do things like roads and schools and those sort of things. But you basically just try not to push things on anybody, so that you can't say, oh my gosh, you're favoring this group over this group. No, that's not the case. We're trying to make things as much as we can, fair for everybody.
You got elected in 2018, which means you were the mayor through the BLM riots.
Yep.
How did you navigate that? How have you managed the police force?
Yeah.
What is it like to be the mayor and of a large area where I assume you have a police chief that reports to you? Nope. Or how does it work?
No, it's different. So
interesting.
With the city of Knoxville, their police chief does report to the mayor. In Tennessee, the sheriff is a constitutional officer. So they're their own. They're actually, it's not the sheriff's department, it's the sheriff's office. So the sheriff has certain duties and responsibilities that the Constitution requires of him. And they're actually not law enforcement, which is interesting.
What does that mean?
his only duties, according to the Constitution, are to run the jail and to serve warrants. Okay. However, they do law enforcement, but what's happened, say in Nashville, is they still have a sheriff's department in Davidson County, but then it's the Metro Nashville Police Department that actually does all the policing, and the sheriff runs the jail and serves warrants, and that's it.
And the sheriff's in elected office?
The sheriff's in elected office.
So the sheriffs are running for office themselves.
Yeah, they're running for office. Yeah. Now, our role is, and we're in our budget season right now, so the sheriff prepares a budget, comes to us. How much does he need? What does he want to do? And we have to figure out how to make that work. Can we accommodate all of it? Can we not? So that's really our role. But once that budget is in place, it's his. He has to go back to commission if he wants to move some money around, but he is responsible for the day-to-day operations of his organization.
So if I'm a citizen of Knox County, that's not part of Knoxville, what cop cars am I seeing? Who's giving me a ticket?
You'll see the Knox County Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
Yeah. And they do a great job. Our sheriff is wonderful. Obviously, he does a very good job. Specifically for like the BLM riots, it was very interesting because, again, we're East Tennessee. So we didn't really see much. But the fascinating thing was the people who peacefully protested, were the folks that I talked to all the time. And generally leaders in whether it's the Black community, whoever, they went out and marched and peacefully protested, made their point, and then they went home. At night, the people that showed up and started breaking windows and things were young white kids. I saw the video of it. And it was basically, and this is what was sad about that really to me about the whole thing was, the left took a discussion about policing, and these are legitimate things we need to talk about, and then spun it for their own purposes and literally used the Black community as pawns in that case. And I think that's disgusting, actually.
We had Wilford Riley on the show, who's an African-American academic, conservative guy, social science guy. And he said, he followed the money, and he's like, the sources, the things that the BLM organization was funding were wackadoo stuff.
It was far left political folks.
Trans organization, all kinds of stuff. Where it's like, what does that have to do with anything? Oh no, it's just all communism.
And then what happened was this very serious issue that does need to be discussed is just lost. And initially had folks on the left and the right saying, this was something that we need to look at. It's really bad. And then you just ended up having everybody at each other's throats because the left, in my opinion, took it and used it. The far left, not even the left, but yeah, the folks you're talking about,
Yeah.
took it and spun it into something completely different, used it for their own purposes. And because of that, that really hampered any discourse that we could have had.
The how what's the demographics of Knox County look like roughly?
As far as
Just like racially.
Uh, we only have a black population of about 12%. I'm sorry, it's about 9%. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so a little lower than the U.S.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But we have other minorities as well. In Knox County. That yeah, for the most part, I think we're about 80% white in that neighborhood.
One of the things that's hit our politics pretty hard, and I have very mixed feelings about how to understand it, is immigration
Mm-hmm.
and its impacts on kind of everything. I think
Yeah.
some of that is legitimate, and some of it seems like it might just be scapegoating for stuff that's unrelated. Has there been an impact of the Biden era massive influx of illegal immigration on your cities? Like, how has that impacted you? Because you're boots on the ground for
Yeah.
this.
So it's interesting. The Trump administration, that they were there for 2 years when I first came mayor. They were actually very communicative with local governments. When I first got into office, my chief of staff and I went to Washington, D.C. They had like County Day on the Hill, where we got to meet with some of the White House officials. Sonny Perdue, who is Secretary of Agriculture, spoke to us. Mick Mulvaney was still the White House chief of staff. The White House chief of staff comes out and talks with a group of county mayors and county commissioners from, I think it was North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Man, I actually became friends with like the deputy director of intergovernmental affairs, which is the person that when you're having issues you talk to. So it was great. I mean, I could call him, and we had flooding uh, in early 2019. We had some flooding, and I'm in the sheriff's helicopter, and I'm basically live streaming the flooding in our county. And he sends me a text. He's like, "Man, I'm watching your Twitter." He's like, "If there's anything we can do, let us know. If you need help with FEMA, all this stuff." I'm like, wow, that's awesome. It's like the White House has your back. When Biden came in office, it was the same through COVID. I mean, you had regular meetings. Obviously, the president wasn't on the call, but White House officials were. When Biden came in office, that all stopped. They didn't talk to anybody. So
Do you think that was just because you're a red state?
I don't know. It just stopped. However, we had an airplane of unaccompanied minors from that I don't even know where they. No one knows even know where they're from. We were just unaccompanied minors who were not U.S. citizens, landed at our airport. I found out about it on the news because no one told us. I mean, there was just I would talk to our.
So the Biden administration was just shipping people.
Yes. Now supposedly
you.
and it's terrible because these are kids without parents, right? This is awful. Now, supposedly they went different places. We don't know because no one talked to us. I would talk with our congressman, again, Congressman Burchett, great. Talk with Senator Haggerty and Senator Blackburn, who I have good relationships with. Homeland Security wasn't talking with them. State Department wasn't talking with them.
So no one in the state.
No, we don't even know. Like, other than kind of anecdotal evidence, I do know that, some of our schools are seeing a big influx of Spanish-speaking students, which puts pressure on us because, those kids cost, they just cost more because of English as a second language and all those sort of things. But otherwise, we're literally blind as to what's happening.
Have you seen a change in the way the state is relating to the new administration, or is it too early to tell?
I think it is a little too early to tell, but I do believe, based on my experience in the previous administration, it's going to be a lot better. And frankly, the Trump administration is just much, much more transparent than the Biden administration was the first time, and I'm sure that's going to be true again. Now, he's been almost too busy trying to fix things at this point. But even the National Association of Counties, when Trump was in office, was thrilled at how much the White House communicated with the counties, because that doesn't normally happen.
early in our conversation, you mentioned Murray Rothbard as one of the people you've read, who I know Ron Paul knew personally. And, so if you come into this world of ideas through Ron Paul, as I did and as you did, you encounter Rothbard, Mr. Libertarian. Rothbard's like an anarcho-capitalist. He
Right.
doesn't believe in any government at all. How do you think about, in a little bit of like a high-minded abstract way, like not just like brass tacks, the role of cities in the future of like government? Because one thing I've thought about is, we have we have massive government like no one's ever seen before. Is there a world where like technology and everything that's happening will almost take us back to like the age of, 1600s Italy, where like the city of Venice is actually really the main thing, and we have more like city states? Like, take me into the future as a libertarian, thoughtful guy and a mayor. Is that role going to be elevated in the future? How do you think about that?
I hope so. Our system of government is actually a lot based on the Swiss, right, and how they did things. In Switzerland, it's flipped between local and federal. Okay, only like 20% of the spending is federal, 80% is local. In the U.S., it's the opposite of that. And it's the federal government has all the power, and local governments have very little. According to our Constitution, the states are actually supposed to be the most powerful political entity. I think we have to get back to that because there are just massive differences culturally and politically between the states. When you think about California, you think New York, you think Illinois, you compare them to Tennessee, to Texas, to Florida. Whew, we're very different. And the way that we can all live together is through federalism. It's basically the federal government backing off on all these things that it shouldn't be doing, and going back to what it should be doing, and allowing the states sovereignty over the many things they're supposed to control. And of course, that would radiate down to the cities as well. And literally, I think that we have to do that because I think that these differences are becoming so acute and so profound that it's causing schisms within our country. And I think that the outcome of that could be less than all.
I mean, you're alluding to, if not civil war, then certainly like unresolvable social strife.
Right.
We're forced to all be at the same federal trough,
Right.
at each other's throats, instead
Right.
of saying,
And that's where we're at right now. Yeah. Instead of saying, we're not going to fight over this stuff because we don't have to. California, you want to do your crazy stuff. That's cool. We're going to do what we would consider common sense stuff in Tennessee. Leave us alone. We're going to leave you alone. We can trade, our people can travel, but you ain't doing that here, and we ain't going to make you do this there. And ultimately, I think that's the solution for a lot of the things that ail us. And then also, it makes the country stronger because we could actually compete with one another. And now again, we're seeing this influx of people from California coming to Tennessee. Well, imagine what that would look like if we're really able to differentiate ourselves. So I think that's the way to go.
A kind of 2.0 version of these United States.
Exactly. Yes, the federal government is just way too powerful. I remember talking. I heard the last speech that former Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam gave to the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce. And it was remarkable because Governor he's a great guy. Politically, he's probably a lot more moderate than someone like I am as far as being a centrist. He sounded just like Glenn Jacobs, though. It was amazing. He'd been the mayor of the city of Knoxville. And he said, as mayor of the city of Knoxville, I knew exactly what our budget was. I knew how many people worked for us, I knew how many vehicles we had, and knew all these things. When I moved up to governor, I would have to call the commissioners to find out a lot of those answers, but I could still call them. He's like, you move up to the federal government, they have no idea. They have no idea what's going on, but they're making all these decisions that impact the local people. So it's true. I think that government that is more local is more tuned with the people of that area, more tuned to the needs than these people that are hundreds of miles away and just completely removed.
Glenn, I ask this of every guest. Like I sort of said before, we call this show Dad Saves America because I think it is a role we play that starts at the family and radiates out to the community, to the county, and ultimately to the country. And it's a place where we can really make a difference as men.
how do you think about your role in the American story?
That's a great question. For me, I just want my grandkids to know that the old man fought as hard as he could. He fought to keep the American dream alive. That's it.
Thanks for being on Dad Saves America, my friend.
Thank you.